Hari Vijaya Charja Sota Sutta Vista language of High Charanara Bhakta Swami Srila ISKCON BPD Founder Choya Save the whole world, Srila Prabhupada ki. Jayanti Vishnu Vishnupada Paramahansa Padiva Jakacharya Asto Tarasata Shri Srimad Bhagavatam Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj ki. Ananta Kopi Vaishnavini ki. Namacharya Shri Haridas Thakur ki. Prenjagaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Gaur Bhakti ki. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Govardhana Temple Thakur Giri Govardhana ki. Rajmani Shivindavana ki, Navdik Makodam ki, Purushtam Chatra, Jagannapuridam ki, Gangamaya ki, Jamunamaya ki, Bhakti Devi ki, Tulasi Maharani ki, Samarvekta Bhakti Bindu ki, Jai Nitai Go Premanandi, all verses and bodies, all verses and bodies, all verses and bodies, all verses, all verses, all verses, Shri Guru and Shri Garanga, all verses of Prabhupada ki. I have to wait for the computer because I don't have my glasses. Thank you.
You want one in the microphone, Prabhu?
That'll probably help. That's what they are, they might make it worse. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Very stylish.
Just from the chemist.
Huh?
Recycled plastic from the chemist.
Usually the best. Oh, I can see. Jata Jale Chandramasa Jata Jale Chandramasa Jata Jale Chandramasa Kampadis Tat Krito Guna Kampadis Tat Krito Guna Kampadis Tat Krito Guna Yathajale Chandamasa Kampadis Tat Krito Guna Drishyate Asam Api Drastur Drishyate San Api Drastur Drishyate San Api Drastur Atmano Anatmano Guna Atmano Natmano Guna Atmano Natmano Guna Drishyate San Api Drastur Atmanatmano Guna Yathajale Chandramasa Kampadis Tat Krito Guna Drishyate San Api Drastur Atmano Natmano Guna Yathajale Chandramasa Kampadis Tat Krito Guna Drishyate San Api Drastur Atmano Natmano Guna Yata as Jale in the water, Chandramasa of the moon, Kampa Adi quivering, etc. Tatkrita done by the water, Guna quality, Drishyate it is so seen, the sun api without existence. Drastu of the seer. Atmana of the self. Anatmana of other than the self. Guna, quality. And this anatmana, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he says that refers to the mind. So that this existence that we're perceiving other than the self is imposed by the mind, is the point that he's making. Translation. As the moon, reflected on water, appears to the seer to tremble due to being associated with the quality of the water, so the self associated with matter appears to be qualified as matter. Responsively. As the moon, reflected on water, appears to the seer to tremble due to being associated with the quality of the water, so the self associated with matter appears to be qualified as matter. As matter. So this is a really interesting analogy, and we'll see in the purport in a moment. Prabhupada explains this purport, this analogy, in many different ways. And Prabhupada would often make the point that an analogy is good when there's many points of similarity. And we will see here how Prabhupada explains these different points. He explains, I think, in 3 or 4 different ways he explains this analogy. And you'll see there's many points of similarity. But also, he's talking about how, due to association, we perceive. And it's just like, to give an example, someone who associates with drunkards, they become a drunkard, even though that's not the nature of the self. So it's a very interesting analogy, and it's very important. Purport. The Supreme Soul, the personality of Godhead, is compared to the moon in the sky, and the living entities are compared to the reflection of the moon on water. So this is the first explanation of the analogy. The moon in the sky is fixed and does not appear to quiver like the moon on the water. So Krishna is fixed, he is steady, he is unchanging. The jiva has the same nature, but the jiva appears to be changing. So, first point. Actually, like the original moon in the sky, the moon reflected on the water should also not quiver, but because of being associated with water, the reflection appears to be quivering. Although in actual fact, the moon is fixed. The water moves, but the moon does not move. Similarly, the living entities appear to be tainted by material qualities like illusion, lamentation, and miseries, although in the pure soul, such qualities are completely absent. The word pratiyate, which means apparently and not actually, this word pratiyate was from yesterday's, or from the previous verse. The word pratiyate, which means apparently and not actually, like the experience of having one's head cut off in a dream, is significant here. The reflection of the moon on the water is the separated rays of the moon and not the actual moon. The separated parts and parcels of the Lord, entangled in the water of material existence, have the quivering quality, whereas the Lord is like the actual moon in the sky, which is not at all in touch with the water. So again, Prabhupada's giving a different example, how the moon, the Lord, is not in touch with the material nature. So there's another way he's explaining this analogy. So even though Krishna makes this statement in the Gita, I can't remember the verse right now, but how he is in all things, but all things are not in him. So even though the material world is nothing but his manifestation, he's not affected by it. He's not conditioned by it, but we are. And this is the difference between. This analogy is very nicely explaining the difference between the Lord and the jiva. The Lord cannot be affected by material nature. Just like the moon is not affected whether the water is still or shivering. It doesn't quivering. It doesn't make any difference to the moon because the moon stays steady. And sometimes Prabhupada also gives the analogy of the moon when you perceive the moon through trees and you look at it and the trees are moving because of the wind or whatever, and it looks like the moon's moving, but actually the moon is steady. It's the trees that are moving. So in the same way, we see how the living entity in this material world, because we're in contact with the water of the material world, we're affected. because we identify with it. That contact is our identification, because it says asango hi ayam purusha. The jiva cannot be affected by matter, cannot be touched by matter, because matter is different from spirit. The jiva is spirit. But because we identify, we choose to think that this is us, therefore we're affected by it. But it's actually not us. But it's just because of this false identification. The separated parts and parcels of the Lord, entangled in the water of material existence, have the quivering quality, whereas the Lord is like the actual moon in the sky, which is not at all in touch with water. The light of the sun and moon reflect on matter. The light of the sun and moon reflected on matter makes the matter bright and praiseworthy. The living symptoms, you could just imagine everything without light. There'd be no perception of it at all. But it's only because of the sun and moon that things look beautiful. The living symptoms are compared to the light of the sun and moon, illuminating material manifestations like trees and mountains. The reflection of the sun or moon is accepted as the real sun or moon by less intelligent men, and the pure monistic philosophy develops from these ideas. In fact, the light of the sun and moon are actually different from the sun and moon themselves, although they are always connected. So Prabhupada is discriminating between the jiva and Krishna here. So there's another way he's explaining the analogy. The light of the moon spread throughout the sky appears to be impersonal, but the moon planet as it is, the light of the moon spread throughout the sky appears to be impersonal, but the moon planet as it is personal, and the living entities on the moon planet are also personal. So again, another way of presenting it. The moon is personal, the rays are impersonal. So, pointing out how, because the impersonalists say ultimately it's all one. Sarva kalvidam brahma. It's all the same thing. But Prabhupada's making the distinction here that the jiva is different from the living entity. In the rays of the moon, different material entities appear to be comparatively more or less important. The light of the moon on the Taj Mahal appears to be more beautiful than the same light in the wilderness, although the light of the moon is the same everywhere. Due to being differently appreciated, it appears different. So it's the same matter, but because it manifests differently, it's appreciated differently. Just like you might have a lump of gold, or you might have a lump of wood. People are going to appreciate the gold more than they'll appreciate the lump of wood. Similarly, the light of the Lord is equally distributed everywhere, but due to being differently received, it appears to be different. One should not, therefore, accept the reflection of the moon on the water as actual and misunderstand the whole situation through monistic philosophy. The quivering quality of the moon is also variable. When the water is standing still, there is no quivering. A more settled, conditioned soul quivers less, but due to material connection, the quivering quality is more or less present everywhere. Yeah? So really nice verse and an amazing purport, how Prabhupada is explaining really clearly our situation in this material world and how it's due to association. And we can see how this association affects us. Like if we associate with saintly persons, we become a saintly person. If we associate with drunken people, we become a drunken person. And you see this is quite prominent in the material society. It is like people, Prabhupada uses the analogy, if you want to become a stockbroker, then you associate with stockbrokers, because then you can learn the language, you can learn how to trade the market, you can learn how to do so many things as a result of this association. And they have associations for stockbrokers, they have associations for doctors, for accountants, all these different things. They have associations. Why? Because they can associate with people who have the similar experience, and they can share knowledge. And that way they become more expert at this practice or this field of knowledge that they're pursuing. So in the same way, in devotional service, one of the keys in devotional service is the association of devotees, because through the association of like-minded persons, one actually develops the quality of those persons. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita, it says, Sadhu Sangha, Shava Shastra Koi, Lava Matra Sadhu Sangha, Sava Siddhi Hoy. That the association of devotees, it's the verdict of all the revealed, this Sava Shastra Koi, the verdict of all the revealed scriptures, that even by a moment's association with a sadhu, one can achieve the perfection of life. So through the association of saintly devotees, one achieves the perfection of life. So this association, it's so important. And Prabhupada's explaining here, and this verse is also explaining, how through association one develops these qualities. Now, this chapter begins with 3 questions from Vidura to Maitreya. And I've got a few notes here. So the first question he asks, and this is in verse 2, the first question he asks is, does the Lord possess desires that motivate him to interact with material energy? Because, he's just explained in the previous section, he just explained, particularly the universe and the universal form. And then, so Vidura is asking, well, is he motivated to do this? Why is he doing this? And if so, does he become entangled by the material energy? And then in verse 9, Maitreya responds that, some people think like that. He said, but this is illogical. It makes no sense, because he's actually, he's unentangled, but he's entangled. This is what they reason, but he's saying this is illogical. Then in the second question, which comes in verse 5, he mentions how the living entity who is spiritual and pure by constitution. This is the nature of all the jivas, is we're completely pure and uncontaminated. And we're fully conscious of past, present, future. How do we become covered by ignorance? How can the eternal soul, who can be neither contaminated or impure, but be unable to remember his identity? And this is our situation. We don't actually remember our identity, even though, in the process of devotional service, we may from time to time have experiences of who we are. And as we evolve more in our spiritual evolution, then this awareness becomes more prominent, and the identification with matter is less and less. This is through constantly associating with devotees, associating with Krishna through the form of his holy name, through the instructions in Shastra, etc. It's just like Prabhupada would sometimes use the analogy of when you have a cup and it has milk, but the milk is mixed with ink. If you put ink into milk, it becomes whatever color the ink is, it takes on that color. But if you keep pouring milk into the cup, and the cup overflows, eventually the contaminated milk will wash out, and then you just have pure milk. And so it's like that in spiritual life. The more we're able to filter out these impurities, then the more we'll take on our true spiritual nature. And the less we associate with matter, the less we associate with these contaminating things, then the quicker this rectification or this restoration to the original state will come. And this is also being clearly demonstrated here. The effect of association. We should be careful not to underplay the effect of association. Sometimes we might go spend time with our family and things like that, or friends we had before devotional service. We should be aware of the powerful effect of association. That if we, of course, we don't want to just like completely ignore our family and things like that, because the opportunity is there to inspire them and to encourage them to take up Krishna consciousness. And we see in many situations, I know lots of devotees whose families have also become devotees as a result of them becoming devotees. So this is the key, is when we're associating with those who are not devotees, then rather than taking their association, meaning getting involved in what they're doing the things they're doing, talk about the things they talk about, give them association. Try in whatever way you can to give them Krishna consciousness. And this way you'll be protected from the influence of materialistic association. Then the next question he asks is the third question. is he talks about the relationship between the living entities and the super soul. With the super soul in the heart, this constant companion, how can a living entity's activities continuously result in misfortune and misery? Because the Lord's right there in the heart. And so Vidura is saying, well, how can it happen? If the super soul is present, Krishna is present there in the heart, how does it happen that we become influenced by material nature? And so this is discussed in verse 10. Verse 10 and 11, literally, you can take them together because they're talking about the same thing. So in the previous verse, he uses this word atma viparyaya, which means essentially it's misidentification. Because we misidentify with the body as the self. This is, the acharyas talk about this avidya, this ignorance, or avidya means knowledge, avidya means lack of knowledge. So because of avidya, because of not understanding who we are, therefore this problem comes. Because we don't accept that ultimately I'm a spirit soul, eternal servant of Krishna. Therefore I become influenced by what's around me. And you'll see that if someone has a strong, clear consciousness, they're able to push through whatever circumstance and not be affected by it. But if someone's consciousness is malleable or weak, then they're very much influenced by what's around them. And the process of Krishna consciousness is about, just like when you dig up an ore, like an iron ore or alumina or gold or something like that, you refine this ore to bring it to the pure state. Just like with gold, by heating gold, the impurities, they'll come to the surface and they take the impurities off and you're left with pure gold. The same with many metals and different substances. By heating, you're able to purify that substance. So the same with the process of Krishna consciousness. And Prabhupada would often use the analogy of the fire of devotional service. So by remaining in the fire, because the fire is a purifying agent in many different ways, but by remaining in the fire of bhakti, then these anarthas or these upadhis are brought to the surface and we're able to remove them. And so this is why it's really important for us to understand, and this is the point that's being brought out in today's verse and purport. It's really important to understand how association affects us. How, by associating with someone who's a saintly person, we'll become a saintly person. But if we associate with people who are materialistic, we'll become materialistic. And the process of devotional service is really about, identifying, what is good association for me, and seeking out that association always trying to put ourselves in good association. Because of, and Prabhupada makes this point right at the end of the purport, which I thought is quite an interesting statement, where he mentions, a more settled conditioned soul. So someone who's more connected with Krishna, because Krishna doesn't have this quivering quality. He's kutastha, he's steady. So when a more settled conditioned soul quivers less. So because of this association with Krishna, we're less affected by matter. But due to material connection, we have a material body. We're in the material world. But due to material connection, the quality is more or less present. It's there, but to a lesser degree. So as long as we have any kind of identification with matter or the material world, we're going to be more or less in this quivering state. But when we give up this, there's a nice verse, Iha yashe hare dasha kamana manasana nikala jiva mukta suchate. That one who has this unflinching faith in the Supreme Lord and the Spiritual Master is considered liberated, even though they're within a so-called material body. And actually what happens is for the liberated soul, the body is understood to be no longer material. And we see with very, very advanced devotees, like generally the tradition within Vaishnavism is that when someone dies, is they burn the body. They don't bury them in Gaudiya or in Vaishnava circles, they're not buried, they're burned. And the reason they burn is to sever the connection from the soul to that body. So the soul, so any attachment you might have to that body is gone because the body's being destroyed. Because what happens if one's attached to the body's buried or sometimes thrown in a river, then this can cause the living entity to again take birth, to take birth, and often what happens is they hang around the body in the form of a subtle living entity. But when the body is burnt, this severs the connection, so it helps the jiva. But for someone who's very, very advanced, for someone who's very elevated, they don't have this attachment to the body, but also they're considered that the body is transcendental, the body becomes spiritual through the bhakti process. Therefore, they don't burn the body, they bury the body in that case. And you'll see this is common with sannyasis, because sannyasi is meant to be beyond the bodily concept of life. Therefore, the sannyasi, they inter them, they pack the bodies in salt and bury them in the ground. So it's just a little bit of a sort of thing. So another thing that's really interesting here is Prabhupada talks about lamentation and illusion, and Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is also making the point that lamentation and illusion, these are qualities of the mind, and these are the two qualities that cause us to be bondage in this material world. And Prabhupada's making the same point. When the living entities are tainted by material qualities like lamentation and illusion, this is what causes them to be bound up in this material world. So the idea is to understand our situation is I'm not this material body, I'm Krishna's eternal servant. This is Jivera Surupahoy Krishnera Nitidas, Krishnera Tatasta Shakti, Beda Bed Prakash. But the nature of the jiva is by constitution this Tatasta Shakti, this marginal potency, which is a manifestation simultaneously different, Beda Bed Prakash, an energy that's simultaneously different, but not different from Krishna. But because we perceive the difference, this is the problem, we perceive the difference more than we perceive the non-difference. And this is due to our association in this material world. So what's happening is we're experiencing what's around us and we identify with it. And this even though we're engaged in the process of bhakti, because of this identification, it slows down our spiritual progress. I can give an example. Last week I was in Delhi and participating in the installation of Sri Lakshmi Nrsimha Prahlad. And it was a wonderful event, and I was doing many different services like they start off with, at least part I was involved in, start off with what is called the Silpi Dosa Snanam, which means you remove, the dosa means impurity. So you remove all the impurities that come from the making process of the deity. Because I don't know if you've ever seen people making deities, but like when the mysteries make the deities, you can go into Vrindavan, you can see them making deities, and the Silpi, he'll be holding the deity with his foot and tapping away with his chisel. So he's got his nose, his big toe wrapped right around his nose or something like that. So there's certain impurities that are associated with the manufacture. So they do this procedure called Silpi Dosa Snanam, where they take products from a cow, milk, yogurt, ghee, cow urine, cow dung, they mix it together backwards into a pot, and then you sprinkle it on the deity using kusha grass, and then you wipe it off. So I was doing that for Lakshmi and Nrsimha, and someone else was doing Prahlad. And then later on, we did the bathing ceremony, and then after that we did what's called the Pran Pratishta. So with the Pran Pratishta, you have a wand which is made out of kusha grass. I think there's about 9 or 10 things in there. And then the priest will be chanting mantras, and you touch all the various parts of the upper part of the eye, the lower part of the lips, and all that. And so I was doing that for Lakshmi. And the idea is you're invoking the energy or the force of Lakshmi into the deity, and you're praying for them to come from your heart and enter into the deity. I was also praying that, always please stay in my heart. But then what happened, when you're doing that, you really feel this sense of connection with the deity. You really feel this sense of wow, I actually am a transcendental living entity, that I get to do something like this. But then what happens is this lasts for some time, but it wears off. At least this is what happened to me. It wears off, and then you start to identify with the body again. You start to identify with your surrounds and things like that. So we can see the potent effect of devotional service, how as long as we remain engaged in devotional service, this sense of being a spiritual being becomes more and more prominent. So, if we are able to engage in things that really help us to awaken this identification, keep doing these things, then this presence or this awareness of our spiritual nature will become more and more prominent, and the effect of the material nature will become less and less prominent. So it's really nice because it gives us this strong awareness of the potency of the process of bhakti, and so this is why it's very important for us to always remain, as Prabhupada says, in the fire of devotional service, because as long as you're in the fire of bhakti, then this material identification will be far distant. Okay, that's about all I have to say, I think. Any questions, comments? Thank you for the use of your glasses.
I have two questions, but I've got to find the other one. So my first question is, you being Nrsimha Kavacha, Prabhu, do you have any, Nrsimha Kavacha Das, do you have any special relationship with Lord Nrsimhadev? Like, is there any more special connection you might want to share with us?
We all have a special connection with Nrsimhadev. I'm no different. We all have that connection. The point, I think the important point for us to remember as Gaudiya Vaishnavas, like sometimes devotees think, oh yeah, but this is Sri Vaishnava worship, this is not for us. But there's a very prominent connection for Gaudiya Vaishnavas to Nrsimhadev, and we even see that Prabhupada, when he had that first, probably the second stroke he had, when he was in the west coast of America, and he asked the devotees to bring a picture of Nrsimhadev into his room and to pray to Nrsimhadev for protection. So I can't remember the word right now, but in the Laghu Bhagavatam, it explains this. Chapter 5 is explaining different incarnations of the Lord. The word's Parabhasta, and it talks about many, the Purusha avatars, it talks about Leela avatars, but also it comes to the point of the Paravasta forms. It gives 3 Paravasta forms. So Paravasta, this is the highest. Yeah? So the first one is Nrsimhadev. So he's completely the Supreme Personality of God, full with all opulences, but he's more in this Aishvarya. Ram, he's the same, completely the Supreme Person, full with all opulences, but his worship is more sweet. And there's more sweetness there. With Nrsimhadev, there's not so much sweetness. But with Krishna, he's fully the Supreme Personality, full of all opulences, but fully sweet. So that's the difference. It's like, so Nrsimhadev is very important for us. And we take shelter of Nrsimhadev to protect us from the onslaughts of material nature. It says that Nrsimhadev is within, he is without. And so we pray for him to be within and just rip out these, just like these Hiranyakashipu desires, to rip them out of our hearts. So this is Nrsimhadev is there for protection. And even though, like you'll see in Mayapur, we have this form of Ugra, Sthana Ugra Nrsimha, which is supposed to be the most fearsome. But because he's in Mayapur, and because we're Gaudiya Vaishnavas, he has the mood of Lord Chaitanya, which is this very Audarya, this very compassionate, this very merciful mood. So even though he looks quite fearsome, he's got all these teeth, he doesn't have that mood for us. But for the demons, he has that mood. Very, very, heavy on the demons. But for the devotees, he's very compassionate. But yeah, I don't have a special relationship.
Okay, maybe could you tell us what the meaning of Nrsimha Kavacha is?
Well, 2 different meanings as far as I understand. Kavacha is a shield. So it generally refers to the breastplate. But also it can refer to a mantra, because there's a mantra called the Nrsimha Kavacha, which is a protective mantra. It protects the devotee from all these different attacks of the material nature. So yeah, two different ideas, but same thing. One's a physical shield, one's a mantra shield. Yeah. It was a lot of fun installing the deity, and it really helped me to perceive, more and more my position. It was a very humbling experience, but also very, very gratifying. I was very grateful for being in that situation, very grateful for the service I have. And I just think this is really important for us as devotees. Whatever situation we find ourselves in, rather than complain about the situation, be grateful, because it could be a lot worse. I mean, all we have to do is just look around this material world and see what people are dealing with. Just reflect on what the devotees in Ukraine are dealing with. It's like at any moment, some rocket could come through their roof and blow their house up. I remember years ago being in Sarajevo, just after the war had finished there. And the house below the temple, the whole roof was caved in like that, where some sort of projectile was flying through the air and went through the roof but didn't explode. So, we should be very grateful for everything we have. That's an important part of our cultivation of bhakti. Anything else?
What temple was the
Radha Parthasarthi temple in Delhi. So now they have Lakshmi Nrsimha Kavacha, Gaunitai, Prabhupada Bhaktisiddhanta, Radha Parthasarthi, Lalita Vishakhi, and Sitaram Lakshman Hanuman. Hopefully they're not going to have any more.
4 altars. Thank you, Prabhu. You mentioned, we know that Krishna is in our heart, and still we are suffering, as Vidura asked question. So we are suffer because of our bad karmas or something like that. But how about the pure devotees? They realize Krishna, but they still suffer. So what could be the reason there?
Well, there's a nice verse that Prabhupada quotes in the 13th chapter of the Gita, which is Tatein Kampam Susam Lakshamanam Bhujane Vapakripam Vipakam Hridvaga Vapavi Viradan Namaste Jivetiyo Muktipade Satoya Bhak. That we understand that all these things are happening due to our past misdeeds, and that Krishna, out of his kindness, has reduced them to a token. So, the devotee should feel, I should be suffering so much more than this for all the sinful things I've done in the past. I should be suffering like anything. But Krishna, he's so kind. He's reduced that. So this is how the pure devotee thinks, is that, these things are happening to me because of what I've done in the past. But Krishna, he's so kind. He's just reduced this to a token just to remind me of what I've done.
Okay, so they're still suffering there.
Well, but the pure devotee doesn't identify with suffering, because he doesn't identify with the body. He just sees it as something that's come due to my past activities. He doesn't identify with it. Therefore, he doesn't see. Like we see that Srila Prabhupada, some things happen to him from time to time, but he didn't identify and start to lament. Oh, why am I suffering so much? Because when you identify with it, you lament. Why is this happening to me? Why is this person doing this to me? Through identification. But if you don't identify with it, you understand what it is. It's just due to past activities. And sometimes it's not even that, especially with greatly advanced devotees, pure unalloyed devotees, or those who have descended to this world in particular to participate in Krishna's pastimes. It's just pastime. Like we see with Prahlad Maharaj, we see with so many great personalities. Prahlad Maharaj is being persecuted by his father. Or with Arjuna. Arjuna is an eternal associate, and the Pandavas are eternal associates of Krishna. Look at what they had to go through. Bhishma Dev was poisoned. They tried to burn them in the house of lac. So many different things they went through. But this was all just Krishna's pastimes in order to bring about the Bhagavad Gita. We see the same Parikshit Maharaj. He's going to be bitten by a snake. The Takshaka, the snake bird. But what was the point of that? And he, it describes he could have counteracted that easily. And there was another, giving class in Delhi, there was another point, in the second canto, there was another personality that was discussed there who was in a situation, he could have easily counteracted it because he was a powerful person, but he didn't. Why? Because he understood that this is Krishna's desire, this is Krishna's will, that this is manifested. So, yeah, just if you see a greatly advanced devotee and they're experiencing some suffering, you should never think it's ordinary. You should never think, oh, they're the same as me, therefore they're not advanced devotees. Don't try to equate them to be ordinary persons, because we don't know. We have no idea what's going on. We have no understanding of their spiritual position. Krishna Maharaj. Nandu.
Just a couple of points to that. That verse that you referred to, forget which canto it is.
10:14.
That the body, the pure devotee is not connected
Yes,
to the body.
14th chapter of the 10th canto.
And Prabhupada gives also that analogy that it's like a coconut in the coconut husk. When you shake it, you can actually hear the coconut rattling because it's not attached to the husk. So Prabhupada uses that example that for the pure devotee, he's completely detached from the body, just like that coconut's rattling. And then we can see in Prabhupada's, Prabhupada also said that sometimes the pure devotee, the spiritual master, he gets sick because of the sins of his disciples. That, if they're not following. Yeah. And I read recently, and Prabhupada said that sometimes the spiritual master might have a bad dream, and it's because of the sins of his disciples. And then we look at Prabhupada's own example, that even though at the time of his departure, even though his body was suffering so much, it was in a very acute state of suffering. And what was Prabhupada doing? He was translating Srimad Bhagavatam. So Prabhupada's that perfect
and preaching to
example.
his disciples.
Sorry?
And preaching to his disciples.
Yes.
And so that's that analogy of the coconut is really important for us to help understand about this point of association and how we have to not identify, how we try to avoid associating with matter and associate more the transcendental. In that way, we because of identification, because we see ourselves as being this body, therefore we suffer the effects of the body. But if we don't identify with it, it doesn't mean it's not happening. It doesn't mean it's not going to happen. It means we won't identify with the suffering. It goes on. It still happens, but that's just part of being in the material world. Birth, death, old age, and disease. You become a pure devotee, the body's not going to die. Of course it's going to die. That's just the nature of the body. It's temporary. The body's going to get sick. The body's going to get old. And we all experience it as we get older. There's so many inconveniences come with the body. So it doesn't mean that for a pure devotee these things won't happen. It means you don't identify with it because you understand this is not me. This is the body. And that's one of the points that's being demonstrated very clearly here is the effect of association. So if you identify with the body, you'll experience the effects of the body. If you don't identify with the body, it keeps going on, but you don't identify with it. You don't think, well, this is happening to me. You think this is just what's happening to the body. Just like you're driving down the road and a wheel falls off your car. You don't start thinking, oh God, I'm broken. It's just a car. It's just, okay, put another wheel on. So you have to see it the same way with the body. It's like, okay, the body's broken, get another body. Hopefully a spiritual body. But don't identify with it. That's the real lesson that's here. Okay, thank you very much for Prabhupada ki, Samaveta Bhakta Brinda ki, Jai Nitai Gaur Premanandi.